Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Fellas, what makes you think pulls us so much into these pictures? What is it about them that is so fascinating?
Liminality is fundamental to the human experience and represents a sort of nowhere between an origin and a destination. This makes it feel ungrounding. These spaces remind us of places or times where we exist for a little while but don't properly belong, like a school after hours, or a gas station on a road trip, etc. The concept is actually pretty heavily celebrated in a lot of cultures. Coming-of-age rituals often introduce a liminal period between childhood and adulthood during which participants complete some task or embark on a journey. A common Western example would be the tradition of the groom and bride at a wedding not seeing each other until the altar.
I don't know how to describe it. The pictures are empty when it feels like it shouldn't be empty. It feels wrong for them to be empty. Like it feels like just outside of the perspective/camera, or around that hallway, or behind that door, or just beyond that window, or just around the corner you're going to run into somebody or something, but you never do. These pictures invoke a feeling of paranoia. You feel like you're alone and you feel like you're not alone at the same time. There's a presence in the emptiness, but there's not a presence. If these images had sound, they feel like they'd sound like casual human sounds without a source. Like hearing somebody have an everyday conversation or hearing a television, but when you enter the room the sound goes away and nothing's there. It's hard to describe.
For some reason, this image and other similar images, of which there seem to be eerily many on the internet, give me this strange thought. I imagine an alternate reality where time does not really pass and I am eternally trapped in an infinite lavender field with a strange, unfamiliar sky, being watched by the suspicious hot air balloon, never having any sense of understanding. And then, another terrifying thought, that if I imagine perfectly clearly that I am in that place, while the version of me in that place also inexplicably imagines my life exactly, that we may end up trading souls, and I will be trapped for the rest of eternity in that terrible realm.
I remember somebody once describing how to enter the mirror world, and that he had done it on several accounts. It is difficult, because every time you try to enter a mirror, you hit an obstacle, and you can see it right in front of you. Try to put your hand into the mirror, and it stops right at the fingertips of your reflection's hand. In order to pass into the mirror, he claimed you need to find a way around your reflection. To do this, he suggested something along the lines of arranging a three-mirror triangle, all facing one another, so that each mirror reflects infinitely inwards upon the next, then sliding them closer and closer together until such an angle that you can approach a mirror nearly perpendicular and not collide with your reflection. It may also have had something to do with covering some of the mirrors at some point, or breaking one of them, but I can't remember. Either way, he basically described the mirror world as literally a mirror reflection of ours, but dead silent, with mirror image versions of people in our world, and many empty spots that have no people, items, animals, colors, etc., where I guess no mirrors in our world were ever constructed in those places, and thus, no mirror image of our world to create mirror life. Only the suggestion of a building being there or something. The mirror people go about their daily lives, which basically involve mimicking our exact daily lives, but only capturing the details that can be seen from our mirrors. Anything not in the range of a mirror ends up blurry, colorless, or flat and featureless. However, aside from his first visit, it was never just a curious little jaunt. While the mirror people cannot perceive you in any way, they are tangible. It's just that since you technically don't belong in their world, they have natural right of way, being literally immovable and unstoppable. He advised against ever getting in a mirror person's way and always keeping your eyes about you just in case you end up in one's path. Every trip, according to him, carried a cost. He was not the only human to know about the mirror world. He described hearing radio chatter amid the silence, especially when he often noticed black cars rolling around that no mirror person would notice. From his observations, it had seemed that our governments had already been aware of the mirror world long before him, and already had a presence there, attempting to use it somehow, to either figure out a way to extract resources from it, or to somehow use it as secure, secret, near-infinite storage space, or a safe space in a catastrophic event. He described how they were often seen installing some kind of surveillance devices in people's homes, working right under the noses of mirror people reflecting a living room scene, completely unaware of the suits working around them, tucking these things into corners, and hiding them in cabinets and shelves. His theory was that the government was using these as a form of reverse surveillance. While the devices are audible and visible to us in the mirror world, and one could just pick one up and toss it away, the dynamic would work in reverse, with the mirror world installed devices being silent, invisible and non-tangible to us in our world, so we wouldn't even notice them, and if we unknowingly break one, the suits in mirror world replace it without us knowing. However, the devices are believed to be able to record data from both worlds, and output two simultaneous displays that the suits could watch from the mirror world. Regardless of what they were there for, there were a few times they nearly caught him. Somehow they could tell that he wasn't a mirror person, and any time they caught sight of him, they immediately started moving towards him and chasing him until he could get back out the mirror he entered, promptly switching the mirrors away from each other in our world again. He was always on the lookout, always on the run in the mirror world, always being watched by someone. And then, there's the other thing too. I just remembered why the guy mentioned covering or breaking some of the mirrors during the entering process. Just as you are entering a mirror from an angle where you won't collide with your reflection no longer is able to collide with you. You enter the mirror world, your mirror self enters our world. Covering or breaking the mirror your reflection would emerge from while you enter, prevents it from passing through, so once you enter mirror world, if you didn't mess up, you should also see your own mirror self, standing completely still, staring into the broken/covered mirror, waiting for you to uncover it or look into another mirror from our world to summon it to mimic and reflect you again. With you in the mirror world, your reflection basically has no input. This may be how the suits ended up tracking him down. Either way, he never dared to step in front of his mirror self as it stared into its not mirror, to look it in the eyes. He mentioned something about how our eyes themselves are reflective, and he simply did not want to test what would happen when you do the kind of shit that would cause the internal logic in a video game to cause a hard crash.
Imagine a suburb that's just blank houses with no windows and no doors. Just shells, and they go on forever. You have to imagine, because I can't find a picture. Just this one house on its own.
This is kind of what the mirror world guy mentioned. No mirrors in our world were ever constructed in those places, and thus, no mirror image of our world to create mirror life, only the suggestion of a building being there or something. Anything not in the range of a mirror ends up blurry, colorless, or flat and featureless. He described those reflectionless places just like you described, just rows of completely identical houses or office buildings, sometimes with generic landscape features, repeating streetlights or sidewalk, sometimes with just open holes where windows or doors would be, complete empty inside, sometimes with just flat windows and doors sort of painted onto the walls, and no interior to speak of or at least witness, sometimes just completely generic and featureless, just flat blank walls all around, a big solid cube with a roof. These would repeat for as long as there was no field of vision from a mirror in our world. Yes, this also meant that some completely featureless buildings would have fully furnished and populated interiors for certain rooms or hallways, but everything in the next room, hallway, or floor was generic, featureless, geometrically perfect concrete walls, floors, and stairs. He witnessed one mirror person leaving a reflection area, only to walk down to the lower floor and slowly, like literal slow motion, walk in a broad circle before going back up the stairs to reflect his real-world counterpart again. Places existing on the very edge of a mirror's reflection area were unsettling. The mirror people were extra simple and generic, resembling mannequins with blurry or just no faces, their mimicry being very vague and indistinct, and the furnishings of their spaces being almost just simple geometric shapes with some lines painted on.
What's the meaning of this? I mean, all images evoke a ridiculous feeling of nostalgia, as if they were all from places in my memory I went to years upon years ago. Feels artificial, though. What's going on?
There's a couple things going on. Scenes like these are very nostalgic to people who have lived in both rural and urban settings in first world countries, particularly, it would seem, in the 1990s. Most of us had to follow our parents around to places like school, doctors' offices, their workplaces, old auction rooms and basements, malls and department stores that were often just being built or just closing down, and many other places where we would, for a brief time, witness something rare, a purely man-made world, utterly bereft of mankind. We would get a rare glimpse into, say, an entire floor of an office building, completely empty and void of humanity, dead silent, sometimes with just artificial light, sometimes in darkness, sometimes just in the natural light through the windows. No furniture, no paintings on the walls, but yet no natural landscape to speak of, just the human-made, perfectly smooth, square-angled walls, floor, ceiling, and occasional architecture furniture that couldn't be removed. The styles of these places evoke an older time, but a time now salient to us, being within it, seeing it true in the designs of the architecture. Sometimes we would be cut off, only catching a glimpse through the window before our parents dragged us away. Sometimes we would get the privilege of being able to run around in these areas, and by God did I ever feel an intense desire to do so, to literally run through them, not away, but into, to explore, excited to see every room and hallway and wonder how big it all was. It felt so devoid of life that it actually felt safe, like nothing bad could happen because nothing could happen. I felt powerful because I was the most powerful thing in the world without things, the only sounds being my own footsteps. It was almost disappointing whenever I got the opportunity to actually look into every corner. No more mystery, adventure over. It would get our young minds racing, imagining what the place might be like with people in it, what they'd be doing, how different it would be, and yet how unrelenting the structure itself was, living long before or after people lived within it. We would often return to memories of these places, even though the experience itself only lasted maybe 10 seconds to 30 minutes. We would almost be forced to realize that even though we left, and the place is long gone from our lives, and we are going to sleep in our human Y households, those places are still there. All the lights are off, and the doors are locked, but those places still exist, standing still, in silence, with only the motes of dust falling through the air, even while we sleep. We start to think of how long they had remained there just as we saw them, and how long they will remain, long after we are gone. I know for myself, these places would appear in dreams. I would find myself exploring these vast empty complex structures, never scared, just orgasmically curious, eager to open every new door, to turn every corner. I never had a bad experience in these dreams. Seeing all these images at once though, static, permanent, all together like this, almost paints a strikingly bleak image. It paints an image of our current world, as if all living things and all human possessions suddenly just ceased to exist. However, it could also be interpreted as something bigger, a real-time image of our world tomorrow, already there waiting for us, where the present time and all our existence therein has yet to reach it, implying predestination. Bleaker still, this could also be a real-time image of our world yesterday after we left it with the flowing of time. This suggests that time is a real plane of existence. All mortal existence only exists within a present time, which is constantly moving at a steady rate through a static world, walking into eternal emptiness for a brief time, just to leave eternal emptiness behind moments later. One could only imagine the feeling of waking up one day to find yourself somehow stuck mere minutes behind the present time, facing a world where all life has eternally just left you behind. The footsteps are still fresh, the air is still warm. Sometimes you swear you can just manage to catch the lingering social energy left in the air of a busy room, or hear a faint snippet of the sounds of life amidst the deafening silence, with even the wind itself leaving you behind as it flows with time. Hence, liminal spaces, places between time. It's no wonder King wrote a short story about it that got turned into a live-action production too. In his story, people on board an airplane crossing time zones get left behind. The problem isn't as existential as it is immediate though, because in King's universe, there are cosmic cleanup creatures that devour the empty existence left behind after the present leaves it, including anything left with it.
When I was a student, I used to wander a few times a week into a brutalist architecture empty public research university during summer. Thousands of square meters empty. Offices on the 12th floor, classrooms, scientific machines, empty lecture halls, emergency staircase, libraries. It was super liminal. Didn't take picture unfortunately. At the time I didn't even know about X and that people might be interested in those things. For normies, liminal spaces pictures are weird, and they feel uncomfortable. Also, liminal spaces themselves might want to stay alone as well, and don't like pictures of them being taken.
A liminal space is basically a normal area that looks abnormal because we're not used to seeing it in a different fashion, as in something normally full, a parking lot, playground or hallway for instance that is empty. Liminal is derived from the Latin word limen, for threshold, meaning when you see a photo of something it puts you in an anticipatory, unsettling, hypnotic trance state, whether it be creepy in a melancholy way, nostalgic, off, sad, depressing, relaxing in a dreamlike way, but not upbeat, quirky, comfy, or happy. Most of these pics feel as if we're in the threshold of something, being stuck in an almost undefinable, mind-numbing state.
Most of the time these things have no effect on me, not sure why that is. It's like my brain can't get into that imaginative space anymore where I imagine myself in the world of the image. That said, I think I might understand the feeling that's involved here. When I was like 6, my best friend left and I remember going home and standing in the backyard alone. It was sunny but quiet and cool, and I remember standing there getting goosebumps and just feeling almost a form of pleasure in my body at the shift in perspective, thinking that this time with my friend was gone now and wouldn't be coming back. There was also this time back in early 2011 when my family moved to another city but left me staying at the family home a while. It was rented till I could get a place. It was summer and I suddenly had the house all to myself. 2 pets had recently died also, so it was just me and 1 remaining pet. I was spending a lot of time on R9K in 2010 and then it was banned suddenly, so I was alone with nobody in the world who knew me. And even that place of connection had suddenly disappeared, so I was totally alone, but I was happy and enjoying myself reading. The sunlight would stream in with a very sort of reddish hue in the afternoon, and the stillness and peace was so beautiful and sacred, I often get almost like flashbacks to my time there for a few months. I returned to R9K and spent some more time there, and felt more connection and so on. Then the culture changed and I found myself feeling alienated and alone, and so I'd go back to the archives a fair bit and get this sense of the hauntedness of this space, even though it wasn't even a space at all. It's weird, the disconnect between visiting a live site and visiting the archives. Technically, there should be no meaningful difference in experience apart from the interactivity of communication. Again, I would get this beautiful, sad, nostalgic, haunted feeling.
I was with a friend in Zanzibar and we got really drunk with some Portuguese girls one night. The next day, we went on a reef exploration trip or something and we drove there with a small boat and a few locals. I was hungover and got seasick along the way. The driver of the boat at some point made us some chopped fruit and I remember starting to feel a bit better, talking to this Portuguese girl, when all of a sudden I get this reflux feeling in my throat like I'm close to vomiting. I say nothing, just jump off the boat in the shallow water and wade to the beach. I walked along the beach for a minute or so, the sun was shining down brutally. I am on this uninhabited island with beautiful sea all around me and I spot an old little fishing vessel about 2 meters long on the beach. I walk up to it and sit on its old wooden hull, a leaning pose. I remember looking around me, there was no one around, just me, the sky and the sea and this old wooden fishing boat. It was truly a surreal experience. Half a world away in a place I don't know, I get this feeling that I am on the right track with my life and that this is exactly where I am meant to be in this specific moment, and oddly enough, that I have been here before. It was magical, one of my fondest memories. I liked your post, Anon, so I decided to portray a kind of surreal experience that happened to me.
Liminal means relating to a transitional stage or occupying a position at both sides of a boundary. Liminal spaces, such as waiting rooms, parking lots, stairwells, and rest stops, make you feel weird if you spend too much time in them because these spaces exist for the things that come before or after them. Their existence is not about themselves. Beyond the place you're coming from or going to, the liminal space isn't really meant to be its own entity, so you feel weird and the space feels odd if you spend too much time or think too much about them. Your brain tells you that something's wrong because you're supposed to continue moving on in life, but you're not, so it feels like reality is altered. Along with liminal spaces, there are other places where your brain gets confused and reality feels offset. Our brains rely on context in order to make sense of the world, and when you're in a situation or place that's out of context, it creates a sense of discomfort or anxiety. For example, walking around a school building when school's out of session, abandoned stores, empty buildings, or being awake when everyone else is asleep. We're experiencing these locations out of context. We associate a high school with being crowded and noisy, so walking through the empty halls takes the place out of context, and your brain is saying, "Oh no, this isn't right. You need to get out of here immediately." Brains like familiar situations, so when you're in a place where the brain has already established a context, but it's wrong, that part of the brain starts to feel like it must be dangerous, hence the feeling of anxiety. Meanwhile, the logical part of our brain says, relax, it's just an empty building. So you don't go into a fight or flight response, you just feel uneasy. The places that give that liminal characteristic vibe the most are those I encounter in dreams. This is also because my dreams have a great emphasis on places and sites and the setup of these sites. Basically, the predominant theme of my dreams is architecture, and the characteristic symbolism of this architecture maps probably to the architecture of my psyche. And most importantly, the observation of this architecture is always linked to a certain set of emotion and feelings that is specific to the dream state. I cannot feel them in waking life for a decent amount of time, only recreate a glimpse of the experience. The characteristic of the architecture is often mazy and chaotic, with hidden corridors linking unrelated places, empty places on an enormous scale, railroads, overpasses. If every sane rule and taboos of architecture could be broken, explored, that would be the liminal spaces in my dreams.
Be me in the subway. Near midnight, waiting for the last train. The clock shows 12 minutes until the train arrives. Absolute silence because no one else is on the station. Sit for 12 minutes like an idiot and then rush into the train. The train car is empty too. Hell.jpg. Ride for 20 minutes, no one boards that train car. You are the only one leaving the train at your home station. Even the police officer at the entrance went home. The street outside is empty too. Meet no one on the 5-minute walk to the apartment building. No cars on the street. No one in the elevator too. Happens to me occasionally and it is weird as F. Pic is an empty square before sunrise, taken with a potato phone many years ago. Same feeling but less creepy because the park in my hometown is awesome when empty. And as a hiker the feeling triggers every time when I am alone on a mountain.
Grandmother lived in a trailer park when I was a child. Years later moved into an apartment with family that was down the street from trailer park. I was now in high school and liked to stay up late or all night. Would go for walks around 4 a.m. Had to pass the trailer park. Would always stop at the entrance and stare down the long street, bordered by trailers. The area was so dark, the only light was orange glowing street lights. No one around, everyone asleep in the dead of night. Felt unnerving every time. It also made me uncomfortable knowing my grandmother used to live there, but no longer does. I used to spend a lot of time there, and it weirds me out that I have no business being there anymore. Places that I used to live or frequent at a period of time, but don't anymore, make me really uncomfortable to revisit. It's an overwhelming sense of nostalgia, but also surreal that these spaces used to be significant to me at one point in my life and won't be that way again.
Where does this idea come from? It all started in 2009, when I was only 4 years old. I had gone to sleep. This happened more than 10 years ago. Automatically I don't remember the details of what I did that day. I dreamed something bizarrely strange. I was in a totally black place. The floors were black. The sky was black and everything around was dark as an abyss. Right in front of me was a court like a volleyball, futsal, or basketball court. Strangely, there was no one there. There were bars that prevent the ball from going out in a game of this kind of sports, reinforcing the idea that someone had once been there. Then a beam of light came from the sky, as if there were a spotlight in the center of the ceiling. But this center of the ceiling was non-existent or just impossible to see. On the court there was a ball that fell several times. It was as big as the height of a 4-story building. The noise it made was extremely uncomfortable and loud. I felt like I was being tortured and I just felt like I had been stuck in that place for hours and I just wanted it to end soon. More than 10 years later that trauma persists in me and my brain refuses to forget and erase that event from my memory. Nowadays the idea of liminal spaces, kenosis and anime are themes explored by urban legends, but what makes me want to discuss this with you is the fact that, how is it possible for a child of only 4 years old to have such a dream without at least having any contact with the internet or tales of such places? My dream is not the only one. In the next topics of this discussion I will talk about the mysteries surrounding our reality, and the allegory in which we live, the true allegory of the cave. I was in a town in which I had arrived via a dirt road, The town was empty, dark, and without people, without animals and empty buildings. In another dream, I was in the same place, but this time there were people. Even this particular town appeared in several dreams. Another dream, I had occurred in a mansion, where all the people who lived on the street and in the other mansions knew me, but I didn't know them, and the people seemed robotic. Anonymous contributor's account. Explaining the theory of similarity. Taking Plato's allegory of the cave as a basis, we see only what is shown to us as reality. The creator puts the figure of the horse into the fire, the horse makes a shadow, and the inmates inside the cave believe this to be the most beautiful and pure form of the animal. Besides, how would they know the true form of the horse without ever having seen it? Nor would they know the name it bears. I wonder, for instance, if just by changing the course of an event can lead to the fact that your parents never met and you never existed, why can't there be several storehouses that hold these other realities? Where in one of them you reacted to the robbery and ended up dying, as much as another where you did not react and are still alive. If God is so omnipotent and powerful, why can't He create a system that is prone to various changes? Like a software or computer program. Why can't God and evolution coexist? What is evolution? What are we? What is the universe? What is life? What is reality? What are dimensions? There are many questions, but few answers.
I think I've made a mistake giving into schizo lore, plebit creepypastas, and actually discovered something unsettling. I'm not sure I would classify this as paranormal, since I'm sure there is a scientific explanation for this phenomenon somewhere, but it has me shaken anyway. Essentially, after being so tired of the liminal spaces spam and Redditor backroom posts on here, I decided I'd actually try hanging out in a place that makes me feel unsettled. Why? Just for fun, to renew the novelty of the idea for myself. Now, the concept of these spaces is simple. Everyone knows all about that unsettling feeling you get in those places. Building hallways, empty shopping malls, empty indoor swimming pools after closing, since that's the basis for so much creepy shit on X, Reddit, YouTube, etc. That's the point. You're in a transitionatory place, you feel unsettled, and so you leave. Incredible. I don't know anyone who hasn't felt that way before. But not many people actually stay in those places for long periods of time. At most you linger for a few minutes, or a bit longer if you're brave. I wasn't able to find any stories about people who actually stuck around in a creepy hallway or an empty staircase to bask in the feeling overnight. So I decided to do it myself. I live in a pretty small town, and about 10 minutes away from my house there's a little wilderness park, and at the far end of that park there's an indoor public bathroom. It's a quaint concrete building with a staircase that leads underground. Don't ask why. It's right at the edge of the woods. New graffiti doesn't appear there anymore, and crackheads just don't like the place for some reason. There's plenty of easier places for them to take shelter, I suppose. It's shitty, and it has that liminal space feeling in the staircase, and especially at night. So obviously, sitting on the staircase itself and just feeling that sensation is the perfect place to creep myself out for fun. You know when in one of those spaces, you get that feeling of being watched? That's a familiar feeling to many people I know. While I was there, the longer I stayed sitting on that staircase, the stronger that feeling was. As an experiment, I tried walking down the staircase and just hanging out in the creepy building itself, but the feeling of being watched lessened. I had to actually stay there, in the frame of the staircase, sitting on one of the stairs for the heavier feeling to build up. The feeling of being watched really started to overpower everything, and somehow, don't ask how, I was able to fall asleep there, and that's when shit hit the fan. If I could that now, I would. I woke up with the feeling still present. In fact, in the haze of waking up, I actually thought someone familiar was there in the place with me, until I came to my senses and remembered I was alone. I couldn't convince myself to stay anymore. I was too spooked, so I got up and left. That was on Thursday. Now it's Sunday. Multiple things seem to be wrong with me ever since I did that. The first thing wrong is that I think I've broken my brain or developed some kind of schizophrenic delusional syndrome. That feeling of being watched seems to follow me now, much stronger than I've ever felt it in my life. Like for instance, if I'm up getting a snack at night, on my way back to my room, I feel so strongly like there's somebody walking behind me, a presence that lives in the hallway. When I'm awake late in my room, I feel it coming from just outside my door. And it's not a mild feeling either, it's very intense. Now, I am familiar with creepy dreams, nightmares, etc. I don't get them frequently, but they do happen. Now, I have a familiar dream I've often got ever since I was a child, where I'm just standing in a rather unfocused place and I feel like someone is there with me. That's it. That's the common dream I get. It's not a menacing dream. It's always been quite comfortable whenever I've had it, just vague and unspecific. I've always associated the presence with feeling like I was just hanging out with someone, or like it was a friend or close family member. I'm so familiar with that dream, but for the first time in my life it's been changed. It's the exact same dream. I'm standing in an unidentifiable place. There is a presence with me, but this time, instead of an invisible presence, it's an actual human person standing directly in front of me and looking at me in the dream. It's been more lucid than it ever has been, but the feeling of calmness is gone. The man has a severe appearance, like he is upset at me or expressing some kind of strong emotion toward me, looking directly at me in an intense way, but he stands motionless and says nothing. And my surroundings look a lot like the outdoor bathroom I was standing in. Maybe someone here can describe for me what this means. Am I insane? Is it demonic possession, an ill omen? Why has this never happened to me until I decided to hang out somewhere that people don't normally hang out in? I woke up this morning with sleep paralysis, and it took a while to shake it off, and the feeling of being watched followed me for a few hours after I woke up. I can't stop looking over my shoulder, and I can't shake the sight of that man. For some reason, I find his energy so unsettling, even though it's just a regular-looking guy. I can't describe the way his eyes make me feel. It's a certain look, and his presence feels too familiar. Take Related from the Opus as my poor rendition of what he looks like. No doubt I will be able to sketch a slightly better rendition if I continue having the same dream, but at this point I feel like I've screwed myself up somehow beyond recognition. I just wish I hadn't have tried to creep myself out and risk getting stabbed by a crackhead just to develop a mental disorder from the experience. It takes a lot to get me feeling this creeped out. Fuck X and fuck Redditors. I blame this board for pushing me to experience this, since it's probably a psychotic break. Even as I type this, I can feel like I'm being watched. I no longer feel safe alone or in my own dreams.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.